Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Paranatural Podcast. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jake.
And so what do we got for him tonight, Jake?
Well, we have something that I've never heard of, and I'm about to learn just with you guys.
So I decided to give Jake a treat tonight. We're going to do the Albert Ostman story, but before we do, Jake, just how you been, man?
I've been doing good. How
doing
about
good,
you?
doing good, doing great.
Awesome.
Excited to tell you this little story here.
Oh, I'm excited to hear it.
We're going to have some fun. So
Yeah.
I guess since our show's not that old, we don't really have all that much to take care of, except to say that if you do enjoy our show, please go and give us a 5-star rating and review on Apple iTunes. If you decide to do that, we will not only shout you out on the show, but if your review is particularly kind or humorous or what have you, we will read it on the next episode. So please do that. We'd really appreciate it. It's the only way our show's going to grow. Other than that, if you enjoy it, tell your friends. Tell everybody you know. Share it around. We'd really appreciate that. Anything to add?
Thanks to the couple of downloads we got already.
Yeah. You guys are awesome. You're the real ones.
Yeah.
All right. So, without further ado, the tale of Albert Ostman.
Oh, boy.
So, this story takes place in 1924. Okay?
I'm listening.
So, but I'll introduce you to Mr. Ostman a little bit.
Oh,
so,
boy.
He was born in Sweden in 1893. And at the age of 20, he immigrated to North America. Now, he was not your city-dwelling type of guy. So, he worked as a lumberman and a road grader and a prospector. So, anything that keeps you outdoors, out in the mountains. He lived and worked in Canada. So, he's a Canadian guy.
Hey.
Which, hey to our brothers to the north. So, just kind of an outdoor adventurous type of guy. Well, in 1924, he had been working for like a straight year as a lumberman and decided that he needed to take a 3-week vacation. Now, being the type of guy that he was, his 3-week vacation was to go look for lost gold mines in British Columbia.
Wicked.
So, he started out in a little town called Lund in British Columbia and bought supplies there. A whole bunch of canned goods and bacon and beans and 4 pounds of prunes, mac and cheese, which I didn't even know existed in 1924. So it's like a classic food as well as one of my favorites. A few pounds of pancake flour, a bunch of Rye King hardtack, which have you ever had hardtack?
I have not.
Oh, God, it's the worst.
Awesome.
It's like chewing on cardboard.
Yeah.
It's bad. A quart of butter and 2 1-pound cans of milk.
1 pound cans of milk.
I don't know what 1-pound cans of milk are, but he bought them. He also had some sugar, salt matches. He had his miner's pick, which he had like custom made. So it was a pick on one side and an axe on the other, which is pretty badass.
Right.
And he had a
apocalypse.
30-30 Winchester rifle.
Beautiful.
So that's what he had. That's what he had. And his pack was assumed to weigh about 80 pounds. Okay? Keep that in mind.
80 pounds.
So what he did was, after buying all of his supplies, he hired an old, I'm going to say First Nations person to guide him, but he says Indian. He calls him an Indian, and I'm probably going to wind up calling him that while I read the story, because that's what he called him. And where he was going was a place called Toba Inlet, which is up in British Columbia. Albert said that the Indian was, quote, a very talkative old gentleman who told him all kinds of stories on their way up there. One of which was about a quote-unquote white man who was a heavy drinker. And he would come into town and just blow through his money in the saloons. And whenever he would run out, he would go up into the mountains for a few days and come back with a bag of gold. But one time, he went to go to his mine and never came back, which happens up there in the woods. However, the Indian told Albert that some people said a Sasquatch killed him. Okay.
Oh, boy.
Oh, yeah. It's a damn Samsquanch. Now, Albert claims he had never heard of a Sasquatch and asked what kind of animal the old First Nations person called a Sasquatch. To which the man said, quote, "They have hair all over their bodies, but they are not animals. They are people. Big people living in the mountains. My uncle saw the tracks of one that were 2 feet long. One old Indian saw one over 8 feet tall." Unquote. Albert replied to this by telling the old man that he did not believe in fables about mountain giants. Maybe those types of things existed thousands of years ago, but they did not exist today. The old man said, quote, "There may not be many, but they still exist." So, we're going to take a little pause here.
Okay.
In case you hadn't noticed, this is a story about Bigfoots.
Right. I love Samsquanches.
Now, this being a story about Bigfoot, I don't know, should I save all my issues till the end, or should I go into them while we get there?
Oh, I like to hear them.
Okay, so this whole first part I find extremely coincidental that Albert had never heard of a Sasquatch before, and now he's going to encounter some right after somebody tells him about him for the first time.
Yeah.
That's awfully coincidental to me.
These things happen.
I mean, I suppose they do. But my other issue with it is the word Sasquatch. Now, an old First Nations person, I feel like wouldn't use the word Sasquatch. That's a white man's bastardization of an allegedly Native American word. I could understand if he used the word in his language for them, because they do have words that, describe creatures that we think of as Bigfoots and Sasquatches. Right. But to say the word Sasquatch, that's a little suspicious to me. So I kind of feel like Albert made this part of the story up. So
why the fuck you lying?
That's what I have to say to you, Albert.
Well, to be fair, you have to hear about aliens before you know that you've been abducted.
Okay, that's maybe a good point, but that's usually a you've been abducted and then hear about alien situation and realize you'd been abducted.
Well,
not I coincidentally heard about this thing before I encountered it. Heard about it for the first time before I encountered it in my life. I just find this a little damn suspicious. Now, the story about the mine shaft and all that, like, I would believe that, like, an old guide or something would tell that story.
Right.
Trying to drum up business and say, hey, I'm the man for the job, all that. But the Sasquatch story, I can't buy it. I don't know. I just don't buy it.
Then how'd you get the book?
Look, I really love the story, okay? This is what we do this for, because the stories are great. Some of them are really believable. And I don't deny everything that happens in this story. And we'll kind of get into why I say that. But something I haven't said yet was that Albert Ostman didn't even tell this story until 1957.
Oh, goodness.
So for 33 years, he never told this story. So it's just not that unbelievable to me to say that he might have added some detail to make it a better story.
Right.
So, all right, where were we? Okay, so Albert eventually gets to Toba Inlet, which is where you want to be.
Right.
Right. And what he does after that is he spends a few days. Now, a lot of people say 3, but in the story when he tells it, it sounds like more. So 3 to 5 days, something like that. Hauling around this 80-pound freaking pack through the mountains, looking for a place to camp, to set up permanent camp. And he wasn't bust assing up the mountains and stuff to get there. But that is not my idea of a vacation. Like 80 pounds on your back, just up and down the mountains and shit. No, thank you.
No, I've had better vacations.
So Albert was definitely a tougher guy than me. Like, that's his idea, some time off. So eventually he does find a spot and sets up camp. And the way he describes it is, quote, a classy setup. So, yeah, he's like an adorable man. He's got some quotes in here that are just like, even if this story is bullshit, Albert Ostman was like a phenomenal storyteller. And some of the stuff he says is just great. So he's at his camp. Now, he describes himself as a heavy sleeper. And so one morning he wakes up and notices that like things have been disturbed in his camp. Just moved around. Nothing is destroyed. Nothing is missing. Just disturbed. So the next night he loads his rifle and tucks it kind of under his sleeping bag. And at first he thought it was a porcupine, which are very common in that area of the world. And they get into your camp and shit. But the most adorable part is, you know what he calls a porcupine? A porky. And I don't think I will ever call them anything else again in my life. So, since he thought it was a porky, he took his shoes and he put them in the bottom of his sleeping bag because apparently porkies like to chew on leather.
Yum.
So, that's what he did. And he went to bed and woke up the next morning. And his pack sack had been emptied out. Like, turned completely upside down, but still hung on the pole where he'd hung it to try and keep it out of reach of things like porkies. So something just like took it off, put it down. This time he was actually missing things. Half-pound pack of prunes and all of his pancake flour had gone missing.
Damn it.
Which, when you have animals raid your camp, things going missing, getting eaten, that's not so uncommon. But what he found strange was that his bag of salt had remained completely untouched. And apparently, porkies really like salt. So he was starting to have some doubts about it being a porky and thought maybe it was something else. So he went around his camp looking for tracks and didn't find anything. So he also decided it probably wasn't a bear because bears like to destroy things, and nothing had been destroyed, just went through with those couple of things missing. And I know I've seen like what bears can do to a camp, and they will tear everything up.
Oh, I've been there firsthand.
Right. So, I know, and he's on the right track with that. It's probably not a bear.
Yeah.
So what he did was he spent that next day, he just stayed right near his camp instead of going out. What he was doing from this camp was going out into the mountains looking for this lost mine. Mm-hmm. Well, instead of doing that, he just stayed right near his camp, but he like went up on a big rock that was nearby where he could overlook his camp and kept watch all day. And he was still kind of hoping it was a porky because he wanted... Because, quote, so I could get a good porky stew, which I have actually heard they are good, like if you eat them.
They are disgusting. They taste like shit.
Do they really?
They do.
I've heard otherwise.
They taste like pine.
They taste like pine?
Yes.
Like chewing on a pine tree?
Like, yes. I have eaten 3 of them in my day, and each time, survival mission... They taste like shit.
It's not good, huh? Well, apparently Albert had different taste buds than we do.
Yeah.
Because he was eating cardboard hardtack and porky stew.
Yum.
Maybe he could dip the hardtack in the porky stew and make a shit-on-shit sandwich.
Hey, that's probably why he was a tougher man than us.
It might be.
He has to eat that shit.
It might be. So, anyway, that night, he makes sure his pack sack's all closed up tight. And made sure to take, like, real special notice of where everything was in his camp. He did not undress, only to put his shoes in the bottom of his sleeping bag again. He took his prospecting pick with the axe, and drove it right into one of the cypress trees under which he was camped, so that it was like right in reach from his bed. And he took his rifle and tucked it down in the sleeping bag with him. Now, his intent was to stay up all night, keeping watch. But like any little kid on Christmas waiting for Santa, poor Albert fell asleep.
Poor guy.
Poor guy. He was a tired man. He's been hunting porkies all day. So he falls asleep, and what do you think happens?
It gets disturbed.
He woke up to being picked up.
Oh.
So that is one light sleeping motherfucker. He sleeps until he is getting carried. Now, was so asleep that after he wakes up, he did not know right away where he was. So you ever had that thing where you wake up and you're like, where the fuck am I?
Oh, yeah.
Yep, that was Albert. Which he quickly remembered that he was on his prospecting trip. Now, the first thing that went through his mind was that he was being carried away by a snowslide or like an avalanche.
Yeah.
But then he remembered that there was no snow anywhere near his camp. So obviously that couldn't be it, right? So what he said was he felt like he was tossed on horseback, but he could feel that whatever it was carrying him was walking. So horses have a very specific gait. Well, so do people.
Yeah.
And whatever it was not moving like a horse, but more like a person. So he's stuffed down in his sleeping bag, and he tries to get to his knife, but when he put it down there, it was like it fell to the bottom, so it was under him, and he couldn't get to it. But his rifle was right there in front of him, so he holds onto that thing for dear life. And he said that every now and then, as he's being carried, he could feel his pack sack bumping against him and touching it, and he could feel the cans inside, which is how he knew what it was. So after what he guessed was about an hour, he felt like he was being carried up a steep hill. And whatever was carrying him was starting to breathe heavily and would give a slight cough every now and then. So, you might going up a hill, especially if you're me.
Cigarettes do that.
Now, he says that by this, he knew that it was a Sasquatch. I have no idea how a man who had never heard of a Sasquatch until a few days before can identify it by heavy breathing and a cough, but apparently Mr. Albert Ostman could identify that.
Something in his porcupine stew.
Something in his porky stew and his hardtack. He knows what a Samsquanch feels like when it's carrying you. Knows what it's like when one carries you up a hill and coughs. So, here's Albert. And he's all trussed up in his sleeping bag. And the way that he kind of fell into the bottom of it, he's sitting on his feet. And one of his boots apparently had turned sideways, and it was a hobnail sole boot, which is, are you familiar with that?
Nope.
Well, what they are is they literally have nails driven into the bottom so you can grip better and stuff. Well, one of the nails is rubbing into his foot, and he said it was real painful, but he couldn't move. He couldn't adjust. He couldn't nothing, because here he is all trussed up in his damn sleeping bag. And excuse me, he said it was hot inside there, and said, quote, "It was lucky for me this fellow's hand was not big enough to close up the whole bag when he picked me up. There was a small opening at the top. Otherwise, I would have been choked to death." Okay, it's a sleeping bag. They are not freaking airtight, Albert. No. You're not going to be able to not breathe just because you're lying or sitting in your sleeping bag. Okay, that's just... Stop being dramatic, Albert. I can imagine that would be an uncomfortable situation, and you might feel stuffy and claustrophobic, but you can damn well breathe. Eventually, he felt himself going downhill. And every now and then, he would get, like, touched to the ground. And for a little while, apparently the Samsquanch just decided to drag his ass along. So, like, downhill on a rocky mountain getting drugged, that would pretty much suck. Eventually, they hit level ground, and whatever was carrying him, like, started to trot. Now, this has been, like, well over an hour. We're almost, like, 3 hours in, according to Albert at this point. Something carrying an 80-pound pack sack and a grown man that can still run after going up and down a mountain. That's pretty impressive.
That's impressive.
Like, that's impressive strength and endurance right there. So apparently Samsquanches, they're beasts.
Yeah.
They are athletic AF.
AF.
So Albert says by now his legs were cramping and he was in terrible pain and discomfort, which I can imagine. If you're just like sitting in one spot for that long, all cramped up and shit, it's not going to be the most comfortable situation.
Right.
He kept trying to like estimate like how far he'd gone and how long he'd been in there, and guessed that it was about 3 hours worth of time that this thing carried him. Until finally they stopped. And Albert was put down on the ground, and his pack sack was dropped nearby. He heard the cans hit the ground. Well, Albert, when he tried to get out of his sleeping bag, apparently the Samsquanch had put him down like on a hill. So he like rolls down the hill a little ways. And then he climbs out, and he can't see anything, but he can hear this like chattering. Like he said it was a kind of talking he did not understand.
Okay.
Now, here's the interesting thing. Albert told this story in 1957. It allegedly took place in 1924. Now, I'm a Bigfoot guy. I have heard a billion reports of Sasquatch, you know, and seen all the researcher stuff. Well, not all of it, but quite a bit of it. And this part's really interesting to me because he describes it as chatter, which is the way that people who witness it also describe it today, as chatter. They call it samurai chatter or monkey chatter. There is even actually a recording of it. Now, if you're not Albert's particularly, but an alleged recording of Bigfoot chatter, Bigfoot speech. Now, if you're not a Bigfoot person, which, Jake, you're kind of not, you ever heard of the Sierra sounds? Mm-mm. The Sierra Sasquatch sounds?
No.
So in the 70s, I can't remember the date exactly, two guys, Ron Moorhead and Al Berry. Now, I'm such a Bigfoot person, Jake. You can confirm none of this is in my notes. I'm telling you this from memory.
Confirmed.
They head up into the Sierra Nevada mountains in Northern California, where they record conversations with and between, allegedly, Bigfoots. So Albert Ostman is describing this chatter. And in the 70s, Ron Moorhead records it. And you want to hear Bigfoots talk?
Sure.
All right, I got it right here. Whoops, that was the wrong one.
That's a scary Bigfoot.
That was a joke. That was Chewbacca. Anyway, that's just Space Bigfoot. This is the real one. All right, what do you think of that?
I can see why it's called samurai chatter.
Facts. That's facts.
Yeah.
That's facts. So anyway, that is supposedly what Albert was hearing.
Yum.
Yeah, around him in the darkness. So he climbs out of his sleeping bag. His legs are freaking numb. So he's sitting on the ground, just massaging his legs and listening to this chatter that's going on. Like, and he's surrounded, is the way he describes it. But from just listening, he kind of determines that there's 4 of them, you know, standing around him, just continuing this chatter. Albert said, quote, Oh, nope. Where am I at here? Oh, hey. Okay. Quote, I had never heard of Sasquatch before the Indian told me about them, but I knew I was right among them. That I can understand how you would think those were Sasquatches more than just from hearing something cough as it carries you up a mountain.
Yeah.
But that's what he said about it. Eventually, the circulation starts to come back to his legs, but his left foot was really sore where the boot had been rubbing and digging in and everything else. And so he gets his boots out of his sleeping bag and tries to stand up, but he's all wobbly, unsteady on his feet. But through all of this, he never let go of his rifle, which, yeah, that's what I would do too. I can't blame him for keeping hold of his damn rifle. Eventually, he gets up the courage enough and asks, quote, what you fellows want with me. And again, this is adorable Albert stuff because what you fellows want with, just to call them fellows. Yeah. I would have went with fuckers or something like that, but nope, not Albert. He's a polite gentleman. What you fellows want with me.
I was expecting damn dirty ape.
I mean, there you go. Oh, I should have got that sounder. But anyway, so he asks, what you fellows want with me? He probably didn't do it in the British accent because he's Swedish, but all he's answered with is more of that chatter. So eventually it started getting lighter out, and he could make out the forms of what he calls 4 people. Now, I find it very interesting. Throughout his entire story, he never once refers to them as animals or infers that they're animals. He always calls them people, which I don't know why, but I find that just really fascinating. Anyway, there were 2 big ones and 2 little ones. And obviously it looked like a family to him.
Yeah.
There was the old man, and this is how he refers to them in his story. The old man, the old lady, and 2 young ones, boy and girl, who at first seemed like really scared of him, really like standoffish. But throughout his whole time, like even while they were being scared and standoffish, like they always watched him. Like they'd be hiding behind a bush, like peeking on him and watching what he was doing and stuff. And apparently Albert says the old lady wasn't happy about Albert being there. So, like, she was giving the old man what for about it. Like, telling him, like, what the fuck are you doing, bud? Like, how dare you drag this thing home? Like, but the old man was waving his arms and explaining, apparently. So I think anybody who's been in some sort of long-term relationship can definitely understand what was going on there was that, he was getting in some trouble and he was trying, but baby, just think about it this way. And she was telling him off. Now, eventually they kind of wandered off, moved away from Albert. And so what he did was used his prospecting glass and compass to try to determine where he was. Now, I know what a compass is, but I could not figure out what a prospecting glass was. So my best guess is maybe a magnifying glass of some sort. I really don't know. He said it was around his neck. I couldn't really determine what the hell a prospecting glass was.
I think you're right.
If you guys know, let us know. We love education.
For the most part.
So eventually, sun's up and he looks around and he saw that he was in an 8 to 10 acre valley or basin, which that is a big freaking basin. Yeah. Like that's kind of a big area, and it had a V-shaped opening on the south side, about 8 feet wide at the bottom and 20 feet tall. So that was the way in, way out. He figured that's where he got carried in. All around this valley is nothing but like cliffs, high mountains, look pretty much impassable except for that one notch. And at that notch is where the old man decided to go and hunker down. So he's guarding the exit, which is pretty smart for a legend monkey. Yeah. Which is why I think it's great Albert calls them people the whole time. So Albert's being left alone. So he kind of looks around and figures out a spot to set up camp, which was over by the west wall. He took stock of his supplies, but, which he had all of it. The guy grabs, the old man grabbed his pack sack, so he had most of his stuff. He determined that he had a few matches left. Some of his matches had gotten lost somewhere along the way, but he could make fire with the few matches he had and his prospecting glass when the sun was out. So I kind of determined it was a magnifying glass of some sort. But he didn't really have any wood. There was not like a lot of trees in this little basin, which he said was a shame because he really wanted coffee. I think I would want a little bit more than coffee after all of this.
You know what? But I share the same concerns.
But Albert's the kind of guy that chooses fellows over fuckers, so perhaps he would choose coffee over whiskey at this point. So what he did, he needed water too, and he didn't have like a canteen or anything with him. That apparently had gotten lost too. So he dumps his coffee into a dish towel and goes looking for water, which he eventually found a spring in the valley. It ran like up underneath one of the walls, where he drank and filled his coffee can with water. He got back to where his camp was and saw that the young male was looking through his things, like looking over his stuff, kind of checking it out, but he wasn't touching anything. So he was still like, pretty nervous and stuff. Mm-hmm. And while he was kind of exploring, he found where the Sasquatches were sleeping, which was apparently under like a rock overhang with a lot of dry moss on the floor and these blankets that he said were made of cedar bark strips that were like woven together and stuffed with more dry moss. Which, I don't know what he meant by woven, but weaving something is actually kind of difficult.
Yeah.
So it speaks again to their intelligence. So the first day he's with him was pretty uneventful. He ate his food cold because he couldn't make a fire. The young fellow, as Albert called him, kind of started to come a little nearer to him throughout that day because he was curious. So Albert, seeing him being curious, took one of his snuff boxes and kind of rolled it towards the young fellow, who sprang up quick as a cat and grabbed it, according to Albert. The young fellow took it, like snatched it up off the ground, ran over and showed it to his sister. And they kind of played with it and figured out how to open it and close it. And then the young fellow took it over to the old man and they had a quote unquote long chat about it. The next morning, Albert decides that he's got to get out of there. So, even if he's got to shoot his way out, he's leaving. He didn't know which direction to go, but he figured if he headed downhill, eventually he'd run across some sign of civilization. So he packs up his stuff, chambers his rifle, and he heads down for the opening. As he approaches, the old man stands up and holds out his hands, like in a stop or a pushback motion, saying, "You're not going anywhere, buddy." And so Albert says he pointed to the opening, like trying to tell him, I'm leaving. I want to leave. But the old man kept doing like the pushing motion and kind of telling him to go back, and said something to Albert that sounded like soka soka. So I don't know what that means, but that's what he said. So Albert backed up to about 60 feet away. He said he didn't want to be close to the old man if he had to shoot him, because he was afraid a 30-30 would only piss the old fellow off. Which, okay, so if you're not gun people, a 30-30 is very popular for deer hunting. But it's not really a huge cartridge. Like, they say it'll take out a black bear, but they're a little skeptical of that too. But any hunter will tell you, do not go after grizzly with like a 30-30. It's just not powerful enough. So, because he was afraid a 30-30 would only piss the old fellow off, he decided to wait and see if another opportunity to escape presented itself. He says eventually he thought of a story he'd heard about a man who put snuff in a mad bull's eyes to save himself. Now, there are two kinds of snuff. There's the snuff that was referred to in like the 1700s, which is a powdered tobacco that you snort. Then there's the stuff Albert's talking about, which is more like some old school Copenhagen. So, Albert, I don't think you could Copenhagen a bull's eyes and save yourself, but good luck trying it. So I'm assuming the bull man story was more the old powdered kind.
Yeah.
But, and it didn't matter either way, because even as he was thinking about this, he couldn't figure out how he would get close enough to the old man to make that happen. Because, they were kind of trying to keep a distance there. Mm-hmm. But what he did do was decided to leave some snuff in one of the cans, give it to the young fellow, and have, the young fellow would play with it, take it to the old man, and maybe the old man would take a taste of it and maybe kind of enjoy it, That was Albert's plan. So the next day, Albert said the old lady was gone until 4 p.m. and came back with an armload of twigs and grass. The young fellow climbed up the East Mountain, and Albert says that he could climb better than a mountain goat. And the young fellow would go up there like every day, apparently, and pick this kind of grass that had really sweet roots. And that day he came back down and actually gave some to Albert. And Albert said he ate it and it was very sweet and very tasty. And he later said that he thinks that this little valley that they were in, that they were only there because of that sweet grass and like because it was secluded so they could just rest there. Eventually he gave the boy another snuff box with just a little bit of it in there. The boy kind of tasted it a little and then took it to the old man. And just as Albert planned, the old man licked the snuff and then they had a long chat. Also that day, what Albert did was he made like a dipper from one of his cans and a twig. And he gave that to the boy. And the boy took that to the old man and they had another chat. So apparently these guys just, anything that happens, they check in with the old man about it. Right? He's king shit a turd hill around there. So eventually the boy comes back with the dipper and he like points at it and then he points at his sister. So he's saying, hey, make another one of these for her. This toy's cool. I want one for her. So Albert makes one and he takes it over to like where the stream was and like dips it in and like takes a drink and makes a show out of like how good that is. And then he takes another dip of snuff and puts that in and makes a show of how good that is. So the boy apparently points at the old man and said, ook. So apparently ook means give him some. Soka soka means get the fuck away from me. And ook means give him some. We're learning Sasquatch today.
Love it.
Obviously he was indicating he wanted some for the old man. Albert shook his head and gestured for the old man to come to him. So he's trying to get the old man to come closer, so he can see if he can work out a plan, get him to trust him something. But what the boy did was took the dipper and took it to the girl one and did not come near that day again. So he stayed away for the rest of that day. Albert had been there for 6 days and he came up with a plan. And his plan was to get the old man to eat an entire box of the snuff. Right? And what he thought that would do is he thought it would poison him. Right? And then by doing that, Albert figured he wouldn't be guilty of murder because the old man would have murdered himself, which is really interesting because, like I said earlier, he thinks they're people. You know, you don't worry about shooting an animal that's dangerous.
Right.
You know, if a bear was standing between, you know, if you were cornered by a bear somewhere and had a rifle, you'd shoot the damn thing.
I'd shoot it.
So, but Albert thinks that would be murder. Now, me being me, I would shoot a person who had me kidnapped and cornered too, but like we've established, Albert is a much better person than the rest of us. Now, it's at this part in the story that Albert gives some descriptions of these Sasquatch people. So he describes the old lady first and says that she is a meek old thing, about 7 feet tall, 500 to 600 pounds, with very wide hips and a goose-like walk. Which that's insulting, but not as nearly as insulting as what he says next. He said, quote, I'm quoting Albert, she was not built for speed or beauty. Some of those lovable brasiers and uplifts would have been a great improvement on her looks and her figure. So apparently she was a fat Samsquanch with saggy boobs.
That's like my kind of woman.
He says of the old man that he was about 8 feet tall, right? Which is pretty goddamn big.
Yeah.
Like, that's way bigger than a person. He had a big barrel chest and a big hump on his back. So, like, you know, just that muscle. He had big, powerful shoulders, enormous biceps that tapered down to his forearms. So, you know, think of like a bodybuilder's biceps. His forearms were longer than regular people, but well proportioned. He had wide hands, long, broad palms, that were hollow like a scoop, and short fingers in comparison to his palms. Now, this is not in his original story, but he told John Green, who was a old school Bigfoot researcher, that, and he told him this off the record, but John Green leaked it years later. He told John Green that the old man was underwhelmingly endowed. So, according to Albert Ostman, Bigfoot has a tiny penis. At least this one did. So,
Got him!
but that goes back to something I thought a long time ago, that maybe Sasquatchers are so angry because they have tiny penises. And if you are ever under attack by a Bigfoot, just whip out your wiener and establish dominance. They will walk away in shame. So, now the boy was also about 7 feet tall, but a bit leaner and lighter than his mother at about 300 pounds. Yeah, and he didn't walk like a goose. He climbed like a mountain goat. He had about a 50 to 55 inch chest, which is pretty goddamn good, and a 36 to 38 inch waist. So even the young one was built like a truck. He had wide jaws, a narrow forehead that slanted upward round the back about 4 or 5 inches higher than the forehead. So if you've ever seen like the classic Bigfoot look with the cone head, or like a male gorilla, they have that sagittal crest on top of their head. That's what he's describing. Now, the girl, he doesn't say nearly so much. He only describes her as flat-chested with no development like young ladies have. So, I feel like he's a little obsessed with the way the girl ones look. I don't know. It's a little creepy if you ask me. Which I guess I'll just put in there now. So, the tiny dick thing wasn't the only thing he told John Green. The other thing that he told John Green was that he thought he was taken there to be a mate for the young one.
Oh.
If you're laughing at that, you're going to hell and you need to wash your hands. Anyway, so I don't know what it was that led him to have that particular thought.
I gotta wash my hands.
But, that's what was supposed to be going on with the young one. Anyway, back to our story. All of them had hair everywhere but their palms and the soles of their feet. And from like the top of their nose up to their eyelids. He says, this is another one of those little details that actually make me believe the majority of this story is that he gives all this detail and then says he never saw their ears because they were covered by hair. And that's one of those things, if you're going to make up a story and like say John Green says, well, what do their ears look like? If you're making this up, you're just going to describe some damn ears.
Right.
So this is why I feel like a lot of the story he's not really making up. Because it's just little things like that. Now, I think some of it he embellished to make it a better story. But stuff like that, I just don't feel like it's all a lie. So, he said they were all very agile. And that when they would sit, what they would do is like turn their knees outward and just sit straight down.
Yeah.
Right? Which, that's not like a thing a person can do. You can try it if you want. I'll laugh. He says when they got up, they just did like a reverse of that. So like they didn't use their hands. They didn't use their arms or anything like that. They just like stood straight up. So, which some people can do that sort of. But this is like the way he describes it's very athletic.
Yeah.
And, he says that like, the young boy could like climb like a mountain goat. Him and the young girl were always like playing and somersaulting and doing shit like that. So, all right. So one morning, Albert had collected enough sticks and leaves and shit that he thought he could actually make a fire. So what he did was he made his fire after breakfast and made some very strong coffee. And the smell of it must have he thinks is what did it when the old man and the boy came and sat like 10 feet away from him. So Albert pulls out his can of snuff, right? Well, he makes his coffee, drinks his coffee, says can aside. And he said it sat there a while, so it was cooled off. And he pulls out his can of snuff, at which point the old man like reaches for it. And so Albert was like afraid that he was going to like snatch it and waste it. So he kind of held out of the box, which if he wanted him, his original plan was for him to eat it. But now at this point, he's like holding on to it. I don't know if maybe he thought the plan wasn't ready yet or, whatever. But so Albert holding on to it didn't do any good. The old man grabbed the box and just dumped it into his mouth and swallowed.
Nice.
And then licked the box clean. So after a few minutes, the old man's eyes rolled back in his head. And he was very obviously sick. Which, have you ever chewed?
Yes.
You ever swallow it?
Yes.
It hurts your tummy.
I've been sick from it.
Right? So, like, I've never swallowed, like, a whole wad or anything like that, but, like, just I've swallowed the chew spit, and, it'll upset your stomach. So, I can imagine, like, a whole damn box that's going to make you pretty freaking sick.
Yeah.
So, apparently, the old man's sick, and he's in agony, and what he does to seek relief is he grabs the coffee can, which, like I said, had been cooled down by now, and just upends that into his mouth. Grounds and all. Just drinks that thing right down.
That also upsets
tummies. That is certainly not going to be helpful.
Yeah.
So after that kind of hits, the old man, this is sticks his head between his legs and somersaults away, which is a very odd reaction to have for an upset stomach. Just, I'm sick.
What, you don't do that?
That's not how I behave. But he gets a little ways away and he just begins to squeal like a stuck pig. I can understand that, having just eaten an entire can of snuff and downed coffee grounds and all.
But the somersault's weird.
But the somersaults get me a little bit. So at this point, Albert grabs his rifle because he's afraid that being in pain is going to drive the old man to attack. And he wants to be ready, 30-30 or no, it's all he's got. But instead of attacking, what the old man did was got up and just like ran for the spring, looking for a drink of water and some relief. Which that makes sense.
Yeah.
Way more than somersaulting. So Albert sees this as his opportunity. He packs up his shit. He says the young fellow ran to his mom and started just like whimpering and whining and wailing and worried. Right. And he leaves the girl out of this, right? Like this part of it, which is also kind of suspicious given what he said about being the mate and something else, which I will tell you, which is that previous to this, he had thought about making his escape and taking her with him. Yeah, I know. It's just a little bit creepy. But what he said was he just wanted to take it because she was kind of docile. And he originally thought, he claims that he wanted to take her as proof that these things exist. But again, because he thinks they're people, he said he wouldn't have felt right, like making her live in a cage. And that she wouldn't like cities, he says, quote, any more than I do, unquote. So Albert wasn't a city type person. And I think he could understand that a creature or person that was born in the mountains and lives in the mountains and lives in the wild would not appreciate being caged or the, lights and noise of a city.
Right.
And he didn't feel it was right. So, I mean, we can make fun of him wanting to bone a Samsquanch, but I don't know. He sounds kind of like a good dude too, like he didn't shoot and whatever. Anyway, so Albert books it for the opening and he makes it out just in time. And the old lady is right behind him. So like, she's like chasing his ass down.
Good thing she's fat.
And so, good thing, and walks like a goose. How fast can a goose run? Shit.
Gooses are dangerous.
Gooses. Gotta watch out for gooses. But anyway, she's like right behind him. So he turns around and he fires a shot over her head and like hits a rock. And he says she acts like she never heard a gunshot before because she immediately like ducks and runs back in for her safety. Albert says he ran, which duh. And he kept like looking over his shoulder all that day, making sure they weren't following him or tracking him. He wound up finding a canyon and making really good time through the canyon and eventually like climbed a ridge to try and figure out where he is, number one, and then to look behind him to see if they were following him. And what he wound up seeing was Mount Baker off in the distance. So he kind of knew where to go.
Did he have his pack this whole time while he was running?
Yeah, he packed up all of his stuff, which he said was, and I guess I should have added this, but by then, because he'd been there, he'd been out camping for like a couple weeks at this point.
Yeah.
So it was greatly reduced in weight.
Okay.
Plus the stuff he'd lost at camp when he got, snatched. Snatched by a
Sasquatch.
Snatchquanch.
It's a female Bigfoot.
Whoa, bud. Whoa.
Bruh.
So anyway, he sees Mount Baker off in the distance, so he knows which direction to go. So he heads whatever way, and eventually hears the sound of logging equipment. So he finds the loggers, and he doesn't tell them what happened. All he tells them is that he was a prospector who got lost in the mountains. And he never told this story until 1957. So that's the Albert Ostman story. What do you think, Jacob?
I have to agree with you. There's parts that are likely embellished, but there's too good a detail for it to be all made up.
I tend to agree. And it's another one of those where he tells a story in an interview, and it's hard to find the long version of it, but if you do listen to him talk, like, you want to believe him. You know, you really want to. Maybe he's just a really good storyteller. But, like, you know, like we've established, I don't think he's making all of it up.
Right.
The other thing is that he tells this story, and then apparently in Canada, I can't remember what the name of the document is. I should have wrote it down. But it's like a sworn affidavit that, he signed one saying that what he said was true. And what he admits is that, so since it was 33 years later, he says that, like, some of his, like, trip into the mountains, he might have been confusing with other trips into the mountains. So some of the details he gives on that and his campsite and whatever. Mm-hmm. And, like, where his camp might have been. He says he might have got those mixed up with some other trips. But everything he says about the Sasquatches, he says and swears, is 100% true. Even the somersaults. I don't.
I'm just saying. Next time I get a tummy ache, I'm going to try somersaults.
Yeah, you know, it might work. Sometimes animals know more about healing than people do.
Right.
So, that is the Albert Ostman story. Any further thoughts?
Kind of upset I didn't hear about it until now.
Oh, I got plenty more for you, bud.
I'm looking forward to them.
Me too. And listeners, we hope you are too. And so if you are, don't forget to subscribe on your podcast player of choice. I think we're on about all of them now.
Yep.
And, you know, leave us that 5-star rating and review.
And I'll love you forever.
And let us know what you think. And the best way to let us know what you think about Albert Ostman or any of our upcoming shows is to join our Facebook group. Get on Facebook, look up the Paranatural Podcast. I'll tell you what, if you are the first one to join our group as a person that we do not know, because right now it's just me and Jake in there, we will shout you out on the show too. So if you want just a cheap shout out, join the Facebook group. First one or first 5?
Oh, we could do 5.
All right,
we
first 5. First 5 people to join our Facebook group get a cheap and easy shout out on the show. You can let us know what you think, and I promise we'll talk to you.
And sorry if we butcher a last name.
That's the thing. If we butcher your name, we're sorry. Anything else?
Nope.
All right, cool. We really appreciate you listening. Tell your friends about us, and we'll see you next time on the Paranatural Podcast. Bye.
Bye.